reasonable to expect that COVID could resurge. We could have a resurgence of COVID unless there's vaccines produced and everybody's vaccinated by the fall. Sort of the predicted timeline for vaccinations, the amount of tests we have, all those things related to just the virus management itself. And then the second thing is the economic impact of this will continue to generate unseen consequences, good and bad. And so we need to be able to keep that in mind. And then the supply chain itself will react. And so we'll see a lot of variability in the supply chain, which will impact many of us in our ability to serve our clients. And the good news, these are the facts. And so with a growth mindset, you can either look for the good or you can focus on the bad. The good news is it will create opportunities for organizations and for people to innovate if they're well suited to do that. And so that's part of the reason we're actually going to emphasize innovation so much during this week and the time to come. So in order to succeed in sort of what we're calling the next normal, not the new normal, but the next normal until there's another next normal, three keys that we'd really like to emphasize. And this is not just our thinking, we spend a lot of time right now sort of scanning the environment and what is the best thinking out there. So this isn't just Christina and I sort of hatching up stuff, but what we're hearing from sort of industry leaders across multiple industries is that the keys to success really will be having the right information, having the right leadership, which we've been emphasizing, and really positioning yourself to innovate during this time. And we're going to talk more about what each of those mean. I'm going to talk a little bit about the right information right now. So the first task in thinking about the right information really is thinking about and recognizing that you have to be able to cut the noise. We've all talked a little bit about the exhaustion that comes from the noise of this environment, rumors and the news and the hyped up news and people's reactions and all that stuff. It's a lot more noise than we're used to. And that's part of our exhaustion too. It's just like trying to figure out what to pay attention to and what not to. And so the first key is to really get good at that and figure out how to cut out the noise and focus on what really matters or what the right information is. And our employees and the people we lead will be looking to us to do that. And that is part of defining that reality. And when you think about that as an ongoing effort over the next 18 months, that will be a critical component of defining reality, is like cutting that noise for ourselves and for other people. The other thing is thinking about a balance of information and what you're paying attention to. We will have to become adept at balancing, hitting the right balance between sort of the urgent and the emergent and the longer term strategy. And those are very different ways of being in the world, very different ways of working, and we all know that. And part of working with situations like this where things are unstable is figuring out what are the urgent things that you really have to pay attention to and how to do that, but never losing track of the emergent and the longer term arc, and always balancing that for ourselves and for the people that we're leading so that they have that longer term perspective. And I think last week we talked about how that's part of building resilience for ourselves and for other people too, but it's also just darn practical in terms of running an organization and leading an organization. Another component of this will be two-way communication with diverse voices. And so we've talked quite a bit about two-way communication and adapting to do that either through social media, or I think last week we talked about the concept of the kitchen cabinet, having a small group of advisors that you rely on in like a very informal short-term way to get real-time information, or looking to industry experts. We talked about all of that. It's important to have that diverse skill set in front of you and be able to use that to help cut the noise, to figure out what are the urgent and emergent issues, and to make that a two-way dialogue so that you're taking in information, but also using it to define reality for people as your clients and the people you're leading are looking to you to do that. The other thing I'll add to that, for those of you who have a board of directors, whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit, it'll be critical to think about who's at the table on your board. And this is maybe not the case for for-profit, but certainly in the case of nonprofit, we will have to look to diversify the skill sets and the expertise that are on our boards. And so having a good mix of people who are well trained to cut the noise for themselves, for example, will be important. And this is just a small example, but one of the reasons that nonprofit boards always say you should have a lawyer on your board is not so that they can provide legal advice, it's because their brains are trained to cut the noise and focus on the pertinent issues. So making sure you have people with that skill set on your board, as well as people who are strategists and really used to looking at the long term and using opportunities, whatever they are, as an opportunity for innovation. So that may be financial or business strategists. Having somebody, whether it's on your board or an advisory capacity, who's close to your ear, who represents the clients that you're serving and your services, and can help you and the people you lead understand the need to shift your services, as well as whether on your board or an advisory capacity, having somebody who really represents the trends in your industry and some of the best thinking. So whether that's healthcare or that's finance or legal services, really looking at what those industry trends are, what's needed, what the greatest innovations are, where the opportunities are, that sort of thing. And then of course, for those of you who are in the nonprofit sector, continuing to have those philanthropic connections and even ramping them up, key donors. And that's not even just so you can get to the donors to ask for support. It's also keeping an ear with the donor community about what their needs are, what they're seeing across their industry, what their concerns are long-term for the people that they're supporting and the organizations that they're supporting. So I know Christina's going to talk a little bit about leadership now.
So one of the things that Lisa is kind of bringing up there is really an idea of growth mindset, looking past what your normal boundaries are and what it is that is kind of there available for you, and taking down and breaking down that fixed mindset, that mindset of, these are our really hard boundaries, or we're just not good at that, so we don't want to go there. A lot of it kind of one of my favorite stories around growth mindset is about from the book Grit, where they talk about there's a young Olympian and then there's all these swimmer like Olympians watching him race for fun and saying, oh, he swims like a fish, he's such a natural, blah, 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 going on and on about like how great of a swimmer this younger guy is, and forgetting that they all put in that crazy amount of work, the early mornings, the long days swimming, the counting every single calorie to make yourself like the perfect machine to swim. And we as people go right back to that, oh, they must have been born with it. They didn't put the work in, right? And we kind of take away, that's kind of like when you hear the things like the overnight successes that took 40 years to get there. Those kinds of approaches, we kind of assume, oh, they have something I don't have. Instead of telling ourselves, yeah, if I was dedicated, I could do that too, right? And so we want you to focus on, if you're dedicated, look at what those other ideas are that other organizations are doing. And if they're doing something really well, take it and adapt it to your organization and realize that it took some work to get there. If it's the perfect messaging or the perfect invite in, start working on how do you create that area of growth for people, and break down those stories that you're telling yourself from the fixed mindset perspective. And for your team and your organization, look at, celebrating that incremental growth as you're going through each of this. Things that maybe wouldn't have been such a big deal when we weren't in crisis can now be really great things to recognize and celebrate for your team, ways to connect with them, ways for you to help encourage them to continue focusing on growing, because each of those incremental growths in a new direction is going to have a huge impact for the positive, versus just kind of leaving things feeling like they were status quo. The next piece is look at the longer arc. Think about what's your next normal and the next normal and the next normal after that, because as we're constantly getting new information or we see how things play out, the way Lisa talked about, it could be 18 months and there were a few different paths that could take us to the 18-month mark. Each of those things that may or may not happen, those might mark a new normal for your organization. So look at the longer term arc of, where do we want to come out on top from this full crisis down the line? And what are the pieces that we need to put in place, or the people we need to talk to or invite in for a very different conversation than we were having before? Or who are those partners that we need to start building relationships with now, so that we're able to continue a conversation somewhere way down the line when it happens, as well as what are those new normal milestones for you as an organization and what are the opportunities within that. And then make a plan. Now, the plans right now should be more of a living thing, right? A living document that helps you walk this path of making adjustments. And that's something that we often have to continue to remind our team members is that we have a plan for getting through this, and we're going to continue to adjust as new information is available, right? That's part of that setting reality that we've talked about, that you can plan, but you don't want to be so married to the plan or looking at it as it's the only way through. Think about it as it's a living document. It's something that's constantly being adjusted and updated and interacted with, because that's what's actually going to help you and your team continue to move forward. And then focus on that compassion, that not carrying the weight for everyone else, but instead creating the space for them to feel seen and heard and valued and recognized. And a lot of that in this innovation phase is ask them about what their experiences are or what they've witnessed from clients or patients, and get their input on, do you have any ideas of how we could do anything better? Or if there's a specific problem you're trying to solve, go to them. It's a great opportunity to build some very serious buy-in by helping people feel really heard throughout the crisis. And I say throughout because it's not a conversation you want to have just once. It's one that you want to circle back to them, or as new things happen, or as that next normal becomes more visible, that you circle back and say, what do you think of that? How do you think this will affect our patients or our clients in a very different way? And kind of help give them the space to buy in by help building up where you're going. And reset expectations. Each time you have that big piece of new information, help people reframe it and reset that reality, where we're going, what we can do, what we can accomplish, and also what the expectations from the services you were originally providing were until now. What's shifted, what's changed. Maybe the expectations from what your clients are coming to you for have even shifted too. So doing a check-in on what those expectations look like and giving them and sharing them with people from time to time. Then metrics and goals. Helping people realize where they stand and that they are actually reflecting that arc. None of us can produce on the same level that we were producing on before COVID existed. It's just not possible. We're going to make more mistakes if we try to drive that hard. So we have to work smarter, and we have to also be realistic about what can be accomplished within it. And also that's where there's a huge opportunity for innovation, because we have to really look at what's important and essential to our clients and our patients and whoever we're serving. So thinking that through for what's realistic and what not only realistic, what serves the purpose of what we need to accomplish and what people need from us. And then unity. Those opportunities that we've talked about when you're looking at this longer arc and looking at each of the conversations you can have with people, that unity helps to create the buy-in opportunities where people feel much more part of something. And none of us want to break down what we've helped to build up. We want it to succeed when we've invested our time and our thoughts and our energy into it. So the more that you can create that unity of bringing people back together and bringing them through it together, the more impactful the results will be, because people feel really connected to it. A few of the really important questions to be asking when we're looking to innovate and we're looking to really tap into these opportunities. And I'm saying opportunities instead of pivot, because I think a lot of people are getting a little tired of hearing the word pivot. I feel like it's a little bit like that Friends episode, right? With the couch. And so it's getting a little exhausting for people. But think about every time you hear or read an article that says pivot, replace it with opportunity or growth opportunity. A lot of times that space to innovate looks like having to make a change and we get a little scared or uncomfortable with it, and then we miss the opportunity. So thinking about innovation as your chance to kind of refine or do something new or exciting instead of being an exhausting pivot and change. Know what is happening, which means how do we stay aware? Are you having listening sessions with your clients? Are you having people do check-in calls with them to see what their barriers are or what their fears are or what they'd be really excited for you to provide? Then who is at the table and who needs a seat? Take a really careful look around. Do you have your frontline workers as part of the conversation? Are they represented to know all the questions that they're getting on a regular basis? Do you have people who come from maybe a different industry helping to advise you because they aren't used to the box that maybe you feel painted into sometimes? They look at it from a different angle and they have the experience of other industries innovating in different ways. So they might see something that wasn't visible to you or your team. And then what are the right questions to ask? Asking the right question opens a lot of doors for innovation, creativity, getting past those kind of self-inflicted barriers at times, and past the very real barriers. Maybe there's regulations your industry deals with. And finding ways to work with those regulations and still fulfill the needs is important. Maybe focusing more on like the experience somebody has with staying in those regulations, or looking at what are the other pieces and elements here we can innovate. And then how can you change you? As an organization, as a team, what can you change? A lot of times the companies and organizations that we see really struggle when there's any kind of crisis, or even when there's just blips in the economy, are the ones who are unwilling to admit that it's time to make a new version of themselves, kind of their 2.0 or 3.0. And so you want to be willing to not be so focused on grasping to what we knew before, and instead grab onto all the opportunities to grow into something that looks a little bit different. And this is where the who and the how are just as important as the what, because we have to think about when we're making decisions, who needs to be there? Who needs to be part of that table? I mentioned the frontline workers. If you have people who are interacting with clients, but maybe not the ones setting the strategy, those are the people who also should have a voice in the decision making, because they're going to be the ones dealing with the rapid implementation, right? So if you can include them and get different perspectives, then you're giving more people in the organization at all levels a sense of having a voice. So think about who can we include at this table that should be helping to make this decision? And how are our decisions made? Is it through a board? Are they being invited into those conversations early and often? Or are you bringing it to them as a fully thought out plan that you and maybe your full team are really excited about, and then they start to poke holes in it and it feels really deflating, right? We don't want that process, especially now. The more we can invite whoever is really going to have a big piece in that final say, we want them to be part of the early conversations to help drive the ship forward. And then guiding questions. Are we asking people to kind of share what are those important questions? What are the ones that are going to get our wheels turning, or thinking past the story we're telling ourselves? I'm sure a few of you sometimes listen to or read Brené Brown, right? The story I'm telling myself is, and that's a great trigger for what am I telling myself that is maybe feels inaccurate from someone else's perspective, or it feels true to me, but it's not really the full reality. The full reality is maybe we can make some of those changes. Maybe I'm just not as comfortable with them.
And if I can just add, one of the catchphrases I heard from somebody who's a Brené Brown type is to use the phrase real but not true. Is this situation real? Does it feel real to me, but maybe it's not true? And I try to remember that phrase in those situations where I feel a little confined. I have to remind myself that just because I think it's true doesn't actually mean it's true.
Absolutely. I love that. Real but not true. That's perfect. And then we also have the critical questions for innovation. The ideas in those questions, so the questions of what's the story I'm telling myself, but also what are those questions that help you dig in and spark some new ideas or remind you of all the different possibilities that are out there for opportunities, from micro opportunities to huge opportunities to kind of reinvent elements or services within your organization. And some of them are, why do we think these services are still right? It's very rare we slow down and ask ourselves, is the service that we're providing still the right fit for the communities we serve or the populations we serve? We often are too busy trying to make those services run, or trying to sell a service, or trying to get the support we need to run that service. And we don't actually slow down and look at it through the filter of, is it still quite right? Or do we need to adjust it a little bit? And then how can we structure our services for flexibility? One of the huge innovation pieces that's going to come out of this particular prolonged crisis is the fact that we are now a society that has gotten much more comfortable with virtual than ever before. And that has opened a lot of people's eyes to, maybe they don't have to take the bus across town. Maybe they don't have to, travel for that service or take off work for that service, or all of these different elements. So think about, is there a piece of that we could actually keep in our structure that would facilitate ease for our clients or the populations we serve? And then how do we better leverage our resources? Most organizations right now have really had to examine what's essential and what do we really have in store as resources, for the resource of time, the resource of money, the resource of creativity even, and think about, how do we distribute those and where do they have the biggest impact for us? Other ones are, can we surprise and delight our clients or our community partners? Is there something new we can offer that really connects with what their new needs are? Because our needs and what we prioritize as individuals has often shifted through this experience, and it may continue to shift. So there may be new pieces you add or different innovations you add now that then they get reiterated again in a different way later.
Christina, if I could just jump in here and give a small example of a organization using some of these questions. Christina and I were talking about this actually before we all got on. So Christina and I use Vistaprints for our printing needs, and I was mentioning that Vistaprints has now come out, or is doing pre-orders for like really cool masks that are washable and that have filters in them. And we were, talking about this, and we're sure that Vistaprints hasn't changed at all its machinery in order to make these masks. But we were sort of walking through what that might have looked like, and a conversation about, boy, our print jobs are down. People are, some of the work that they're doing with us is sort of discretionary money. We're losing business. What can we do? They clearly recognize that people have a need and a desire for really cool masks. And found somebody to this is our guess anyway, found somebody to subcontract to get those. And then they have an incredible mailing list, right? And I'm guessing that mask makers don't have that incredible mailing list. And so win-win for the organizations. And so 5 weeks before these masks are even available, they're out advertising them, talking about how cool they are, how they meet all your safety needs. And of course, I and everybody I know who I told about it have already pre-ordered our cool masks because we're tired of the black masks. And we all know that we're going to have to do this, or we're thinking we're going to have to do this for a while, and we'd like to be a little bit more stylish. So it's just a good example of sort of innovating. And clearly Vistaprints isn't going to make masks for the next 18 months, but they saw an opportunity to delight their customers and give them a value add that's not in their typical offerings, while also generating business for themselves and probably somebody else who's subcontracting under them.
Yeah, and that's a great example of thinking about not even just the services that you provide directly. What are the partnerships that might be possible for you? Do you have the trust of a certain population that you can partner with someone to provide what they really need? Because maybe somebody's doing certain things your clients need really well already, and you can connect them or be part of that relationship. What are the ways that you can create what they need and not always have to do the full heavy lifting yourself? So we're going to do it a little bit differently today, where we're going to move into our breakouts. We'll come back from breakouts and do a little more content before we wrap up. And Lisa will introduce what those breakouts are today.
Sure. So I just put the questions from the last slide in the chat box. You all will have access to them. And what we're going to do is we're going to break out into a couple discussion groups. We'd like everybody to identify somebody who can present back to the whole group about your ideas. And what we're going to ask you to do is present your takeaways from the 2 discussion questions that you see on the screen. The first is, who needs to be at the table for innovative conversations in your organization? And the second is, what critical questions will free your team up for innovation? And so you won't be able to see this screen, and so we will also put those questions in the chat. You will be able to see the chat. Okay, they're already there. Thank you, Christina. So you'll have the chat information, and I think we're about 10 minutes. Is that right, Christina? Christina, can you just walk people through the logistics of what will happen in terms of what they'll see and what to do and that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to break you out into 3 rooms. And what you're going to see is you're going to get a little pop-up that tells you what your room assignment is, and click Join Now. And that will zoom you into your little breakout room where you have the chance to kind of talk it through. And then if you have any problems, you can let me know. I'll also give you, when you have 2 to 3 minutes left, I'll give you a heads up, and then there'll be like a 1-minute countdown before the rooms close at the end. So with that, you should be seeing your breakout rooms in just a second.
And so as Christina's doing that, just to remind people, we'll come back, we'll share ideas, and then there'll be a little bit more content about how to actually move forward and make changes in your organization to be nimble and flexible.
Yep. So you should see the pop-up rooms and go on in.
Our services, given that we've busted through some of those limitations during this period.
I love that. And that's a great example of thinking about who's going to have a really strong.
Okay, great. And I just want to mention we had the recording off while people were sharing ideas, but it's back on now. So the piece we talked about earlier, change you, right? How to make, once you've gathered the right people at the table to really have diverse perspectives, you have that 2-way communication, you're getting good real-time information, you're involved in generative conversations that identify new ways to do the work. Of course, there's always the piece about changing your organization to be able to do that work, knowing that whatever you put in place is going to have to potentially change again. So when you think about that, we sort of take a page from first that sort of effective change management that we all know, but just to quickly touch on that, always important to have a case for change, whether it is long-term things or doing short-term work. One of the things I'm hearing from leaders that I'm working with is that their staff is pushing back against work. And it's because they have not made a compelling case for the change. They've not explained the why. And so it just feels like one more thing that people have to do. And we're all getting to the point where our workplace feels a little like it's a blitz. It's constant change, constant pivoting, and people don't have the why. And it's not a why connected to the mission or to their well-being or the client's well-being. It's not going to be very compelling. And so, you know, you can continue to force people to do things, but that doesn't build resilience, and that's not good for the long run, even the next 18 months. And so creating that case for change that's really compelling is going to be even more important. And then gathering a coalition for change to push the change. Once again, you know, Christina talking about people own what they help build. And the building is much better when it's the people who have to actually interact, who have to actually push it out or make it happen. It's informed by that kind of real-time wisdom. And so creating a coalition for change that involves the people who will be moving the change forward. Guided by that compelling vision, what is this leading towards? In the next 18 months, assuming that's the right timeline, we're all going to have to do some things that we'll be like, how did I get here and why am I doing this? So tying that to that longer term vision, again, that bigger arc. Why does this matter? Why are we doing this? Why are we creating masks when we're a printing company? You know, how does this lead to our bigger term vision or connect to our bigger term vision? And then there's some work to actually make it happen, make those changes supported throughout the organization. And I'm going to talk about that. There's 4 domains we talk about action needed. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. And then the piece about creating early wins, that yellow dot sort of on your screen, even more important. And the bar probably has to be even lower, honestly, about what those early wins are and celebrating them, because we all need to see that something is working and that all our efforts that we're putting out there actually lead to something, because we're living in a world in which it's really hard to grasp something that's working, to point to something that's working, to feel like we have a checkbox and have accomplished something. And then, of course, continuing to evaluate and change, even more important as in an innovative, rapidly changing environment. And then you just continue. It's sort of wash and rinse again. And so then as we talk about, we go back to those 4 domains that we were mentioning, where you need to actually effectuate change. At one point in our careers, it occurred to us that every single process we've ever worked on where we've seen organizations make successful changes involved changes in all 4 key domains. And then as we went back and really examined it, it really seemed to be the case that unless you make changes in these 4 domains, you are not going to have sustainable change. And so the 4 domains, just to touch on them really quickly, are knowledge and skills. So do we have the right information? And do the people who are moving the work forward have the right information? And do they have the skills to actually move the work forward? And if that's not the case, then you need to make changes. Second of all, the systems. What are the systems that need to pivot or change to support this work? Tanya was mentioning IT has become godlike, right? IT was a critical system change and a huge pivot to make our work change, or our work in this rapidly changing environment. Intrapersonal, the stuff that's inside us, our ability to see ourselves. So anytime we want a significant change in our work, in our environment, we have to look at, what does that mean for me? What do I need to change? Do I have the skill sets? Do I need additional training? Is there something about the way I work in with people that I need to change? Do I need to really lean into certain strengths? Or are there strengths that I don't have that are necessary, and so I need to change how I delegate work? And then that leads us to the interpersonal. How we delegate work, how work happens between us and other people, and how work happens between people, their conflict management skills, their communication skills, all those things. So if you want to have sustainable change, you really need to look at what it will take to sustain those change in those 4 domains. Today, I'm just going to touch on the systems piece, because we've been talking a lot about knowledge and skills throughout this course. And actually, in a few minutes, Christina is going to talk about a leadership development opportunity that is coming up, or maybe I will be talking about it, about a leadership development opportunity that's coming up that really touches on the intrapersonal and interpersonal. But the change you or change the systems, that means looking at the systems aspect, and that could be everything from your people systems, HR systems, how you recruit people, how you train them, how you orient them, how you really support their development, to the organizational structures and systems, to how you make decisions. For example, if you need an innovative environment and you have a hierarchical decision-making process, that's not going to support innovation. So you need to change your decision-making structures. Looking at continuous quality improvement instead of sort of this idea of one and done, the idea that our work will continue to progress all the time. And so we have to constantly keep track of, are we accomplishing what we need to accomplish? And then facilities and equipment. And I just realized we're at time, so I'm going to wrap it up really quickly. What I'd like to say is next week, we're really going to be talking about becoming your next best self and continuing this momentum about what is it going to take to get through the next 18 months. There's only 2 of you on the phone, on the line. I'll just put a plug in real quickly. Christina and a colleague of ours and myself are going to actually, in about a month, start launching another leadership series that's really geared towards what this next 18 months looks like and what people need in terms of leadership. We'd like to take a little break, get everybody situated in this next phase of reconciliation, and then come back to this topic, and we'll share more information about that. So thanks for hanging in there, both of you. Really appreciate it, Courtney and Brian. Have a great week. I will send out a follow-up email with tools and things from this within a day or so, okay? Okay, take good care, everybody.
Very helpful, thank you.
Okay, bye.